All right, Matt, you're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. It's April 24th, and this is the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce. I'm Matt Harrington, the Executive Director, and we've been doing these throughout the COVID crisis here in Southwestern Vermont, as well as the impact it has globally. We want to thank our partners at CAT TV for once again supplying us with the platform and the technology to broadcast live to both our chamber members, but really to the community at large. We hope these are useful. We've done a couple with the hospital, just recently with another one with the hospital, one with UCS, another one with regional partners in terms of economic development and relief. And then just last week, we had our legislative update with Congressman Welch and Senator Sears and Campion. So if you've missed them, please head on over to YouTube and Facebook, as well as the CatamountAccessTelevision.com website. All of those previous videos are there, and we will continue to push those out on our platforms as well. But we have a whole new segment for this telecast that I'm actually excited about, if you can use that word, but I think it's going to really go to some of the questions that we've been hearing from our members. And so I'm excited to have Teresa join me. Just some ground rules before we start. Obviously, we're practicing more than 6 feet of separation as we're all Zooming in today. So we are monitoring that situation closely. And we're broadcasting live on Facebook. So this means that you can comment on the Facebook feed, and I will try and get to those questions. I have a lot of questions for Teresa, and some of them are coming directly from our membership, so that's great. But if you have a question, something spurs a question in you or a comment, please leave a comment at the CAT TV Facebook page, and we'll try and get to it. So with that being said, I want to introduce my guest today as we talk about HR, staffing, tips, tactics, and tools. Teresa Millet, HR Acquired. I've met Teresa for many years, and the Chamber's actually utilized her in some of our HR processes. She's a former president of the Green Mountain HR Association, a chapter of SHRM, but right now is really working in her own company, HR Acquired, working with a plethora of clients, big and small, to help them with their HR questions and staffing questions. Teresa, welcome to the telecast.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the opportunity, and hello to our viewing audience. And yes, as much as we say it's kind of an exciting opportunity to kind of walk through and provide some resources and information, at the same time, COVID-19 is not an exciting topic and certainly not where we want to be spending our time, but thus we are.
Yes, we are. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of your background? I gave a little bit of it, but you have a great wealth of knowledge that we want to share with our audience today. And so just give us a little bit of your background.
Thank you. So I've been in human resources for 25 plus years now, and I am familiar with the Bennington area because I was the HR manager at Plisson Carbon Composites. I love the Bennington area, got a lot of opportunity to get to know some of the businesses down there and all the great work that you're doing. And from there, my last HR position was with Rutland Plywood. And unfortunately, we burned to the ground. And that gave a lot of us an opportunity to kind of think about, what do we want to do? And where do we want to go? That was one of the biggest challenges of my life and my career for sure. And happy to say that everyone got out safely. And a lot of people did things in life that they never expected to do. For me, I decided to start my own HR company so that I could help small and medium-sized companies with HR needs because, as you know, as small business owners, you don't necessarily need a full-time or even a part-time HR department, but you are assuming those responsibilities. They are landing someplace within your organization or your business. And sometimes it's nice to have somebody like me to bounce ideas off from, come in, maybe do some of the administration, some of the employee support, mediation. So that's what I've been doing since 2016 and loving it.
Good. Well, we so appreciate you joining us on the call. And don't mind me, audience, if you've been on these calls before. I'm just trying to monitor questions that we have here as well as on Facebook. So I'm going to be hopping around back and forth. But really, our subject matter expert in Teresa will be giving a lot of the great information. So let's start kind of broad and general, Teresa. What are you seeing over the last 30 days? And there's been a lot in terms of the Department of Labor, and feels like a little bit of throwing the rule book out a little bit just to make sure that as citizens of Vermont and citizens of the United States, we're being taken care of. All that being said, what are some things you're wanting to reiterate with some of your clients and the people watching today of, hey, don't forget, there's still an HR guidebook out there, so to speak. And what are some do's and don'ts that you're seeing right now?
Well, the landscape is constantly changing, which is what makes it really hard to figure out how to navigate. What I'm noticing over the past 30 days is that at first, our essential businesses had to figure out how to incorporate practices and protocols that we really are not accustomed to in terms of the social distancing and how we provide infection control practices at work for those who are working, and how to move people into more of a remote working situation. So that came with all of its challenges and scramble that got put in place. And then kind of on the heels of that, we had non-essential businesses needing to help their employees navigate the whole, you are being laid off or you are being furloughed. What does that mean with regard to benefits and paid time off and those sorts of things? And now what we're seeing is people are going to be able to bring some employees back to work. And so the conversation and questions we had to begin with regard to, for example, the Families First Act. Do my employees, are they eligible for this or not? What happens if there's unemployment involved? And what I see happening now as we're inviting people back to our workplaces, the questions we had originally, they're coming back around because this is all new. The other part that's super important to pay attention to is as time unfolds here, some of the things that were put in place to begin with, for example, I remember when Families First came into play, I think they had 35 Q&As on the DOL website. It was helpful, but it didn't get into the level of detail. Now that we're learning more and have more experience, it has gone to 70 questions, and it is now up in the 80s. So it's important, I think, for all of us as we look at the situation that we're aware that what was accurate before may be the same. It may have evolved or transitioned. So we want to be careful of when we decide what we're going to do to take a step back and say, how can we back that up with the best information we have available to us at this time?
Sure. Are you seeing anything, as the governor does restart the Vermont economy, and we just had a press conference just a couple minutes ago, opening up a couple other, I think it's construction crews of 5 or 6 now instead of 2, and some other things. What is that new workforce norm? And maybe we look through the lens of health first, that at least for the foreseeable future, there's going to need to be a lot more attention to health, touch, contact, things like that. What are you seeing, or what do you predict?
Well, employers are definitely going to have to be much, much more conscious and conscientious about putting things in place, protocols in place that take care of their employees. And I'm not hearing one employer out there complaining about it as much as wanting to do the very best job that they can. And where can I go to quickly pull these items, in place? Where can I pull from where I'm not reinventing the wheel? So when we're looking at the construction industry or any industry where you have folks working outside, it literally is walking through the person's day, right from when they get to our work site. If they have to punch in, how do they punch in and maintain infection control? So as you are navigating through that, it literally is every touch point, and how you are either putting engineering controls in place or some PPE, personal protective equipment in place. It is really looking at it from a multifaceted perspective. What are the things that we can do without that we don't have to do, so that we're removing some of those barriers. The one thing that I would strongly encourage employers to think about is a lot of these things we should have been doing all along, but we for whatever reason, haven't been. So as you are looking at these protocols, creating somewhat of a master list so you're not reinventing the wheel, and figuring out how do you get your employees to buy into this. And a big part of buying into it means they need to understand it. They need to have an opportunity to practice it. And it may sound silly that we need to teach people how to wash their hands. We need to teach them how, and how you go about that, making it fun, making it engaging. But the sustainability part, especially if you have people in the field, you are needing to depend and trust that your employees are going to follow through. You're also going to need to make sure that you, as the leader, are following through too. So if you're not taking that step to look at the sustainability piece, you can have all the checklists you want, and you really aren't doing what you set out to do in terms of keeping people safe. So you really literally need to say to folks, what is it? What's our kind of catchphrase that when Matt forgets or Teresa forgets, because we're changing habits, which is really hard to do, what can be a fun way of reminding one another where it's not, I got you doing something wrong, it's, I've got your back. And hey, by the way, so assigning tools, for example, assigning vehicles, if you have company vehicles, really spelling out, all right, what does it look like when you go pump gas, so that you aren't cross-contaminating? And what happens if we switch vehicles in the middle of the day? How are we going to, disinfect? How are we going to assign tools, share tools? So all of those parts of the job really need to be looked through. I have employers who are saying, we're coming up with some of this with our employees. That is such a wonderful idea. Checking in with employees is especially important, and I'm sure our employers are very well aware of this. It's communication. It really goes back to relationship. We need to keep people safe, but we also need to make sure they feel safe. So those check-ins show that they don't have any questions. You are their go-to place as a resource, and if you don't know, it's finding it out. So it's thinking through the people part of it as well as the process part of doing the job.
Great. So we do still have a large amount of our workforce that isn't allowed back into their offices. And so that obviously created a real remote work for everybody. It was such a kind of a niche market only 2 months ago, and now everybody has had to learn how to adapt a multitude of different things to be a remote workplace. And I just didn't know if you have any beginning helpful tips if they've moved to that way, or I guess most of them have moved that way, but they're halfway through it, and any helpful tips to manage remote work and the staff and productivity and how to be a successful business still.
Sure. It's a good question. As you are becoming accustomed to this new way of working, flexibility is going to be key, being very clear. So, for example, hourly employees, you need to pay for the work that they are doing. So making sure you're having those very intentional conversations about when that work is going to happen. And the more flexible you're able to be versus focused on you must do X, Y, and Z during this time, the more flexible, the more productive. And we know that that's going to be true. Sometimes what will happen, though, is we get pulled into the I'm worried that people are not performing, and creating a more performance issue in that arena. And typically, if you think about it, if you're worried about the employee who maybe is not performing their job and getting the work done, they probably had a performance issue before telework experience and work environment happened. This is probably not going to be the best time to address that. You certainly should be putting the parameters in place, because being clear is really going to help you hold everyone accountable, and it is comforting to folks. So making sure people are paid properly, checking in with them regularly, using technology. I know I was joking the other day that I feel like a phone call is really kind of weird right now because I'm so used to using Zoom or some other visual media and taking advantage of that. What I'm hearing out there is that people are really having fun with it, and the connections between employees and their leaders is actually improving their relationship,
Yeah.
and they're having fun.
Good. Talk to us a little bit about any type of, I guess it's a twofold question. Any type of policy we should be making around remote work? I know we at the Chamber did one very quickly, as well as any sort of compensation or stipend, because now these people are using their homes, their internet, their heat, their own coffee. So have you seen some organizations say, hey, we're still taking care of you a little bit. We're going to take care of you even a little bit more because you're working from home?
Absolutely. You make a really good point. If you have a policy, then you should always be looking at that policy first and seeing if you need to redesign it. If you don't have a policy, Matt, you mentioned the Society for Human Resource Management. Human resources managers have access to that. So there are templates. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. But again, a policy is really that guide that makes sure you have all of these things in place. You always want to be paying attention to the Fair Labor Standard Act, whether you have people working from home or physically working in your business. You need to make sure you're paying attention to the wage and hour laws. So that's not going to be anything new. Sometimes we may think that that is different because the location is different. Not necessarily. So staying on top of that and making sure that especially your hourly employees have a way of reporting that, and definitely looking at ways that you can help with stipends or bonuses or whatever that might be relative to technology that the employee may be using, their own personal technology or devices versus a company device. So it's going to look different for each employer, of course, and perhaps some positions that people hold that are teleworking, but really walking down through. And again, not reinventing the wheel. The information is out there. It's just being able to take a step back and go, okay, I think I need a little more information. How do we go about this? And the other part that I think is important as well is to make sure that your salaried employees are compensated properly. Because we may be thinking that, hey, they only worked a couple days this week. That's hourly employee. When you have a salaried employee, they may, there are exceptions to this, of course, but the general rule of thumb is regardless of the number of hours they work, their pay remains the same. So you don't want to get on the wrong side of that.
Yeah. One question came. We have a couple questions that we asked our Facebook audience a couple days ago to provide some questions. This one comes off of Facebook, and if you're watching live on Facebook right now, we are monitoring. So please leave a question for Teresa, and we will try and get to it and have her answer. But this one comes from Facebook a couple days ago, and it involves the CARES-related tax credits. How does the CARES-related tax credits for employers for sick leave and extended family leave related to COVID-19 work? Families first, 2 weeks of paid leave for COVID-related illness. So I know you and I talked a little bit offline yesterday, Teresa, about the tax credits, kind of this Families First program. Just give us a basic understanding of what that is and how that works.
So I won't recite word for word. What I would recommend is that if this is a question that people have, even if I tell you this information here, you're going to want to go back to the source and walk through it to make sure how you are deciding that people are eligible or not eligible, that you are aware of that, because it's not just about the tax credits. You want to make sure that you are properly deciding that this is a fit in this instance. So if you go to, I'm actually looking at it right now, the FFCRA question and answers, the Families First Corona Virus Act, there are over 80 questions there. And they really have done a spectacular job of walking all of us who are fairly unfamiliar with this, right, through each scenario. I can tell you that along with looking at how those tax credits work, you're also going to be wanting to look at how do I document this? Because you want to make sure you have the proper documentation. If you don't, then when you go to get the tax credit relief, if you don't have it, then you may be denied. The other thing that would be important to know is that in these instances, there are times when it's a portion of the pay. Employers always, with benefits, can be more generous. But just know that, for example, under the expanded leave part of this for taking care of a child at home due to COVID reasons, that it's 2/3 of the pay, I believe, is what that states. You can provide the additional third, but you will not get a tax credit for anything above and beyond that you do.
Yep. Good. And what was that site again, just so that our viewers can maybe be Googling it while we're talking?
You can go to dol.gov/agencies, WHD/pandemic/FFCRA-questions, or you can Google FFCRA
Maybe
Q&A.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's get back to, so we talked about, salaried workers and if they're still working from home versus hourly, and being able to compensate them appropriately, just as we would normally. But for for those employees that have furloughed or been put on UI, what is the responsibility of the organization to continue with certain benefits like healthcare coverage, life insurance, other benefits that we might have been put into specific packages? Perhaps what is the legal obligation of an organization, and then what have you seen some innovative companies do also?
Another good question. So if you've been paying attention to the virtual town halls with Department of Labor, you would have heard them say it doesn't make a difference to them whether you, employer, say my employee is furloughed or my employee is laid off. So Department of Labor doesn't care. It doesn't matter in terms of, eligibility for benefits and that sort of thing. It does matter on the employer side of things. So when you lay somebody off, they are separated from your company. They are no longer your employee, even if it's a temporary layoff. So I always go back to active or inactive. So they are an inactive employee. They are no longer on your payroll. You no longer have any obligation to them other than you're going to be filling out that unemployment paperwork and that separation from work paperwork that Department of Labor is really encouraging us to make sure we take care of that. Benefits would stop as well. Now, you really need to be looking at your plan documents. Mm-hmm. I have seen situations where very well-intentioned employers are asking the question, which is a good question, and wanting to continue to pay, for example, healthcare benefits. Well, you could cause a problem with your plan if your plan doesn't allow for that, and it probably doesn't. So what is being encouraged at this point is that employers reach out to their insurance carrier and have that really good conversation. You may decide to do something more like a severance plan, where maybe the severance is covering the cost of the insurance, COBRA cost. But again, once they leave, they're not your employee. So the mechanism is COBRA if you're, as an employer, obligated to do that. Not all employers are. For furloughed employees, it does work a little bit differently. So furloughed employees, whether they are furloughed part of the time or all of the time, are still your active employees. So the benefit of that is you are retaining your employees. They typically will be eligible for unemployment. Again, unemployment, that doesn't matter to them. What matters on the employer side of it is you can continue to pay for some of those benefits. That said, it doesn't necessarily mean that automatically you can continue to keep them on, for example, your health plan. You, again, if they drop below a certain number of hours worked, you are going to need to circle back and look at your plan document to make sure that you are in alignment with that. Or you may, in addition to that, I would encourage reaching out to the healthcare professionals and saying, is there any wiggle room so that we can, keep paying under these circumstances? Because it's so drastic in terms of what we're dealing with right now.
Great, thank you. When an employer, and I think this gets to some of the questions we saw arising on Facebook and in an email before, can an employer require an employee to notify the company if they've been exposed, have symptoms, and or have tested positive for COVID-19 coronavirus? I was on a call earlier this morning with a bunch of chambers. This one, this one is unprecedented, uncharted territory. I think both for, do employers want to serve as the health kind of czar of their company, as well as what's infringing on some personal space as well? So anything that you've seen, Teresa, and this is probably an ever-evolving, fluid thing here.
Another good question and other uncharted territory. What happens with a pandemic is that responsibilities and obligations we have as employers change. I would still be super careful about how I navigate through this, but in essence, what is out there from the CDC, even under, I believe, OSHA, there are a couple of websites as well that I use as a resource. And yes, you can ask your employee to share this information with you. Now, there could be exceptions to that. So again, what I think is really important is when we have these questions, where is my reliable source to go to so that I can read through that? And kind of it's a decision tree that you're going to walk yourself through. Okay, I found out that my employee, has COVID-19. What else do I need to know? And what responsibilities and obligation might I have as the employer? Because it could be one set of expectations if your employee is supposed to report and they don't. But it also can have to do with, did they expose anybody or not at work? The other part of it is, if they have been exposed, they may be eligible for a leave of absence, right? Through the Families First. So my experience is that most employees would be telling us anyway because they want us to know and they want our help to figure out what is it that I need to do to take care of my coworkers, take care of my family, and what do I have available to, use, for example, a leave in order to do this.
Yeah, great. We might have touched a little bit on this one, but I'll circle back to it. Probably, I think, involves some of the families first. But my child's school is closed and I don't have daycare. Can I work from home or request an alternative schedule? And let's layer in there some other benefits that the employers may be able to deploy to assist that parent.
Sure. I'm going to say it depends, just because you look forward to me saying it depends.
I do.
But if an employee does have a situation where there is work available from their employer and the school has closed due to COVID-19 related reasons, which we know in the state of Vermont, that's an accurate statement because the governor has said schools are closed, and indeed some daycare, childcare providers have closed, then the first place I would look is at the work that would be available. If I were the employee, I would be thinking about coming up with some ideas about how I thought I could work from home and what I might need. What really is impressed upon by both parties, but also primarily the employer being responsible for this, is a really good dialogue back and forth
Mhm.
so that you come up collaboratively with a plan. So even if you look at the Families First website Q&A, there's a good healthy section on, telework and how you design what telework might look like. And they really emphasize, and I think rightfully so, that is a good conversation between the employer and the employee, that you come up with a great plan of what that work is going to look like, when that work is going to occur, how you're going to check in with one another, all of the things that you would be doing anyway. Again, it's just that instead of it being at this physical place of work, it's going to be at their home. And then there may not be full time telework depending on the position. And if you had a full time job, then you're going to start looking at your leave of absence
Yeah.
in terms of your expanded family leave.
Yep. I want to remind viewers that we are live on CAT TV's Facebook page. Leave a question for Teresa of HR Acquired. I have two more, and I don't see any comments on Facebook yet, which always means to me that we've answered every single question, Teresa, that people may have. But we will ask these last two questions. If we get another one on Facebook, we'll keep going. But if not, we'll end there. And of course, we can always have Teresa come back if we find that our members have more questions. But here's one, and again, we're touching on the same stuff here. Although I think this is more about the struggle that employers are having because UI is so beneficial at the moment for people going on UI, unemployment insurance, that it's hard to get them back. But the question was, how are businesses coping with employees leaving to access unemployment benefits for reasons other than being laid off? And I'll even add in there for being laid off. If an employer still has work and needs to hire a replacement, what is the employer's responsibility to the former employee and the new one?
Sure. So the answer to that question again is going to be it depends.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we have this framework of unemployment available, Families First available, and then you have to kind of walk through what each is designed to provide to that employee, you have to take a step back. If you're an employer and you have work available, my understanding from the virtual town halls and hearing what the folks at the Department of Labor have said, if you have work available, then that person, that employee is not going to be eligible, for example, for unemployment. You have work available. They may be eligible for employment, though, if they meet one of the criteria for a COVID-19 related unemployment claim. So there's that one piece. That said, because you have work available, it's also possible that instead of unemployment, that Families First for COVID-related needs would be available to this employee. So one of the places that I notice employers get a little bit confused with, and it isn't confusion because they don't, it's a confusion because they're trying to do the very best thing for their employee and not jam their employee up. So I get a lot of questions about, so I offered Family First and I believe the employee is eligible for these reasons, but they want to go on unemployment and it's actually a better benefit for them. And they are saying to me, I'm leaving because of unemployment and I want to take unemployment. I don't want Families First. Well, first of all, to my knowledge, the employee doesn't get to choose that, even though I understand why. I would be careful of that. And I would want to walk through that in a very knowledgeable way. I would want to look at the Families First. And if indeed that was what was available and appropriate in that situation, I would go to the Department of Labor website, the place that we just talked about. I would look at the sections of the Q&A. I would copy and paste them into a document so that when I sat with my employee, I could explain to them, I believe you are eligible and I'm obligated in this situation to offer this to you. If you decline and you decide to leave your job, I'm going to be required when unemployment sends that paperwork, and this is truthful, you're not trying to jam your employee up, But unemployment is going to ask you as the employer why the person left. And you are going to need to say, had work available, this person decided to turn down the work because. And it may end up with them being not eligible for unemployment. And in some instances, they could end up in an overpayment situation. And who knows what the Department of Labor will do. But in normal times, they would go back to the claimant and say, you actually got money you shouldn't have. You need to pay it back. Okay. So that's kind of very, very important, I think, to really navigate through this very thoughtfully and carefully. And if you come up with a very complicated, and sometimes these situations are pretty complex, you really should get some legal advice from an attorney who practices employment law. Yep. Because the idea is that you're trying to do the very best and make the most informed decision. And the best way to do that is documentation and make sure you're clear as you navigate through this.
Yeah, I know some of the concern. I know some of our, our restaurant members and some even lodging properties that kind of had to quickly let go of everybody as they were pretty much closed, and as they've been able to come back online and offer curbside, or some of them have been innovated to be able to offer that. So now we need more employees to come back, and especially down at that lower socioeconomic range where you're working for a restaurant, working for a bar, whatever it happens to be. I think some of our members and some of our employers are finding that it's hard to get people back to work because the UI benefits are too nice now. They're too good. Anything that you're seeing or hearing from the Department of Labor of, hey, we get what and here's what I've kind of heard. We understand what we've done. We did it on purpose. It's a good thing. We're giving a lot of money away to a lot of good people, but we also plan to, reel that back as we kind of get out of this COVID situation. Anything that you've heard, Teresa, about how to help ease, from the employer's perspective, ease the transition back to normal work life in terms of benefit?
It is an interesting time with regard to that. And we have employers who are quite accustomed to this because they're a seasonal business. And this temporary layoff, if you will, and returning people to work is customary even in these times. The Department of Labor has been very clear from my perspective on when you have work available and you are offering it to that employee and they are turning it down, then they may not be eligible for benefits any longer. Now, it depends, doesn't it? Because if that employee, and this is what I'm running into that employers I don't think really anticipated, is we have schools closed right now. And so they're inviting their employees back to work, and their employees are saying, I can't come back to work because I don't have any childcare. So they are still going to be eligible for unemployment likely. Now, unemployment does have their own calculation and all of that goes along with this. So we can't ever be in a situation where we're saying you are or you are not eligible for benefits because we don't know. All we can do is provide the Department of Labor with the information. And if the employee or the individual, because they aren't your employee if they are laid off, you're inviting that person back to work, you are going to need to report. And I'm not 100% positive right now that how unemployment is asking, or the Department of Labor rather, is asking employers to provide that information to them. But they are going to need to know so that they can continue to extend benefits to those employees, or those claimants rather, who are on a COVID-related childcare reason for unemployment benefits. And then you would need to look at, all right, under this situation, I've invited the person back. What are my obligations to that individual who was on temporary layoff? Now I have the work, but they can't come back because of this. What requirements do I have to keep them on hold? and offer the next position? What's the time frame for that? So again, it is that decision tree and very meticulously walking through. And sometimes I think it's super important for us to just say, and what other questions should I be asking that I haven't asked that I wouldn't know to ask? So always, if you're speaking with someone, make sure you ask that question, because we can't possibly hold all of this new information in our heads or kind of think of all of it. There is one thing that I did want to be sure to mention that folks might not be thinking about as well. There are likely some workers' comp implications for your teleworkers. So if they are injured at home in the course of doing their job, they do need to be reporting that to you. Now, again, it's no fault insurance. So that's what your insurance company, your insurance adjuster does for you, is when this is reported, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to gather the information in the same way and let your insurance adjuster help you walk through that together. You shouldn't be making a decision. And you can even call the insurance adjuster or your insurance contact person to make sure that they help you navigate and maybe answer, does this rise to this level or not? But you likely want to do the same as you usually do, err on the side of caution and reach out and find out as well.
Yeah, an interesting thought there that, our homes have become our offices, and therefore that's a big rabbit hole we could go down that involves a lot of perhaps not appropriate things at the office, but even along the lines of workers' comp. I stub a toe, I trip, what would normally be just a personal fault of my own, and hopefully I had home insurance. Now it gets a little bit more complicated because it's your office as well. Interesting. One final question, Teresa, and then I do want to, if you felt like we hadn't handled one question or something that you're here for, I'd love for you to be able to ask that. But here's a final question, and revolves around the PPP, or the Payment Protection Program loan. If an employer secures that PPP loan, will they need to inform the Vermont Department of Labor if a potential rehire declines to take their old job back? My concern is that the PPP loans might put an employer in a position where they have to tell on an employee who potentially doesn't want to return for whatever reason. Without a better picture of the process there and a good faith in how the issue is handled, I could see where some reluctance for workers to get back in the game with serious PPP forgiveness consequences for the employers. Any thoughts around that, or anything that you've seen or heard recently?
Nothing that I've seen or heard recently. Definitely have some thoughts. It always goes back to what's the data? The data is you have PPP loans to take care of payroll. That's real. That's the truth. The other truth is you have work available. And again, what I hear is the question coming from this place of, I care so much about my employees. I want to make sure I'm doing the best thing for them. Doing the best thing means you're going to have to follow what you actually have available. So if you actually have work available and you happen to have PPP loan funds available to take care of payroll, and even if you don't, you still have an obligation as a business to honestly offer this return to work to that employee or to that individual.
Yep.
At the same time, it is possible that once again, that individual cannot return for the same reasons we just described. But wanting to or allowing that person to stay on benefits when you actually have work could potentially jeopardize your PPP because you have work available and you're not offering it. So as much as we believe we may be helping our employee, I do believe that Small Business Administration advisors, as well as the Department of Labor, would say, we're with you on this one, Teresa. The work is available. That's real. That's honest. Great that you want to take care of the employee, but you could put them into a situation where you are now filling out paperwork and you're saying, I'm being honest about this, when actually you're tweaking the truth a little bit. It's not factual, and that could be easily discovered, and you would have to admit that if you were interviewed about it.
Right. So sounds like some key tips and tools, or really key tips and tactics. And I've heard this kind of across the board is document, document, document. Go back to some of the principles of what you've been doing already. And definitely give Teresa a call if you have questions, which we tend to always do over at the chamber. Teresa, anything that I didn't get around to, and like I said, if we find that we get a lot more questions from our employers after this, we'll do either a live broadcast or maybe an offline Zoom call with many of them. But anything that you're saying, hey, we didn't touch upon this, but I'm hearing a lot out there.
Sure, there actually are a few things, and just to get you thinking about returning people to work and what that might look like, I would ask you to think about what it's like clocking in and clocking out. What are they touching? What do you need to remove? How are they going to actually clock in and clock out without, cross-contaminating? Whether we touched on whether your people are working in the field or on site, you may need to stagger things like break times, start times. You may need to say to folks, listen, the break room is closed. You may need to have vendors deliver outside. You may need to assign different areas and actually really identify if the break room is open. You may need to put signs on different seats and say, can't sit here. So any kind of visual cues you have so that it makes it easier for your employees to follow through versus you following them and saying, hey, by the way, remember the 6-foot rule. You're also going to need to be thinking about face coverings and how that's going to work. The reminders we had talked about. I have gotten some questions about taking temperatures. And, should we be doing that? Because we do know that the CDC has said, hey, this can be a really good tool. Again, there's mixed feelings about that. If you do decide that, what I encourage people to think about is the fact that it may give a false sense of security since many people can carry COVID-19 and not have any symptoms at all. And if you do decide to go down that road, you must read how you go about that, because now you're creating a medical record, and there are certain obligations and responsibilities. There are certain obligations and responsibilities that you have for that person who is going to be taking that temperature if you decide to go ahead and do that. So I would encourage people to be thinking about that. We talked about wages off-site and inviting people back. Talked about healthcare coverage, just quickly going through my notes.
Yeah.
The other thing actually related to workers' comp is it is possible that a workers' comp claim could arise from COVID-19 being contracted at work.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've been asked that question. And there is more information recently about that. What I would encourage employers to really be thinking about is allowing your insurance agent to assist you in navigating some of this. It shouldn't be you deciding any more than you should decide any other time whether it is work-related or not work-related. You really should get the assistance of the people that are available to you and a resource to you, and they're going to have their finger on the pulse of this. Sure. So gather the information, make sure you reach out to the insurance agent, because there are going to be some instances where it could be a workers' comp claim. There are going to be others where it clearly is not, but that's what the insurance carrier does. They figure that out for us.
Great. Well, Teresa, let's do you a favor because you've been so helpful. Why don't you give a way that people can contact you, a website, an email, a phone number, if they have questions after this telecast?
Sure. So if you do have questions and think that I might be a good resource and able to help you, you could call me at 802-558-6053, or you can email me at teresa.mealy@hracquired.com. That's TERESA.M IELE@HRacquired.com. Thank you for that, Matt.
You've done that a couple times.
Just a
Many ways to spell Teresa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I want to give a thank you again to the staff and crew at CAT TV. Completely essential as we continue to communicate about the COVID crisis and the multiple layers that every business, nonprofit, and every community member has to go through, whether it be health, HR, funding, economic development. We will continue to broadcast these telecasts. We'll come out with information in the next couple of days for our next one. But in the meantime, I hope everybody has a great, sunny, warm Vermont weekend this weekend. Thank you so much for joining us today.